Marcus Lewis was a man defined by his kindness. At 36, he had lived a life filled with both joy and hardship, but he never let the difficulties of life harden his heart. Living in a modest house on the outskirts of town, Marcus worked as a carpenter, spending most of his days crafting furniture with his hands, and his nights reading about history and social justice. His family had always instilled in him the value of helping others, no matter the circumstance or background. In his small neighborhood, he was well known as the kind of man who would always go the extra mile for someone in need. Despite the world's harsh realities, Marcus believed in goodness. His father had always told him, "Son, a little kindness can go a long way." It was something Marcus carried with him every day of his life. One late afternoon, after finishing up a particularly long day of work, Marcus decided to take a drive to clear his head. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the quiet roads. He loved this time of day when the world seemed to slow down for a moment, giving him the space to reflect. It was on one of these back roads that he spotted a car pulled over to the side, hazard lights blinking. The road was quiet, far from the main streets, where help would be hard to come by. As Marcus approached, he saw a woman standing beside her vehicle, clearly flustered. Her white sedan sat crookedly on the side of the road with a flat tire. She was pacing back and forth, her phone in hand, attempting to call someone for help, but judging by the lack of reception in this remote area, it seemed she wasn't having any luck. Marcus slowed his truck, pulled over, and rolled down his window. "Hey, you need some help?" he called out, his voice steady and calm, not wanting to alarm her. The woman turned around, looking surprised and relieved at the same time. "Oh my gosh, yes. I don't know how to change a tire, and I can't get a signal out here to call for help." Marcus smiled reassuringly. "No worries, I've got you." He stepped out of his truck and walked over to the stranded car, getting a better look at the woman. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with long blonde hair and a polished professional look that suggested she had come from work. Her name, he would later learn, was Sarah. Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "I didn't know what I was going to do if no one came by. I've been out here for almost an hour." "Well, I'm glad I came by when I did," Marcus said, rolling up his sleeves and getting to work. As Marcus began to jack up the car, he noticed Sarah watching him intently, her hands wringing nervously in front of her. It wasn't often that strangers offered help so willingly, especially on quiet, desolate roads like this one. But Marcus wasn't like most people. He believed in treating everyone with respect and kindness, regardless of their background or status. He had no idea who Sarah was, but that didn't matter to him. She needed help, and he was more than willing to provide it. While he worked, they exchanged small talk. Sarah told him about her stressful day at work and how she was eager to get home to her family. Marcus, in turn, shared that he was a carpenter and had grown up in the area, learning how to fix things from his father. "Your family's lucky to have someone like you," Sarah said, as she watched Marcus expertly replace the tire with the spare. "Not everyone would stop to help, especially these days." Marcus shrugged modestly. "It's just how I was raised. My mom always said, 'You never know when a little kindness might come back around.'" Sarah smiled, clearly moved by his words. "Your mom sounds like a wise woman." A few minutes later, Marcus finished tightening the last lug nut and wiped his hands on a rag. "All set," he said, stepping back to admire his work. "You should be good to go." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you. You really saved me." Marcus waved her off with a chuckle. "No need to thank me. Just pay it forward when you get the chance." She nodded, her eyes filled with appreciation. "I will. I promise." As Sarah got into her car and drove away, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. It felt good to help someone, even if it was just a small act. He didn't think much more of the interaction as he got back into his truck and continued his drive home. But the next morning, something strange happened. Marcus woke up to the sound of a car pulling into his driveway. His neighborhood was quiet, and it was rare for anyone to visit unannounced, especially so early in the day. He looked out the window and saw a sleek black SUV parked in front of his house. His heart skipped a beat as two men in suits stepped out of the vehicle. This wasn't normal. Marcus wasn't the type to have dealings with men in suits or fancy cars. Curiosity piqued, but also slightly on edge. Marcus stepped outside to greet the men. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. One of the men, tall and serious-looking, stepped forward. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis. My name is David, and this is my colleague Robert. We're here on behalf of the Devereaux family." The mention of the Devereaux name sent a wave of surprise through Marcus. The Devereaux family was one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the city, known for their business empire and philanthropic work. Marcus had heard of them, of course, but he couldn't fathom why they would be at his doorstep. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, folding his arms across his chest. "Not at all," David said quickly, his tone professional but warm. "We're here to talk to you about Sarah Devereaux. You helped her change her tire yesterday." Marcus blinked, realization dawning on him. Sarah, that Sarah, was a Devereaux? He hadn't thought much about her background when he helped her, but now everything made sense. The black SUV, the men in suits, it was all connected to the powerful family she belonged to. "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "What can I do for you?" Robert, the second man, spoke up this time. "Sarah told her family about what you did for her. They were incredibly moved by your kindness. She was in a dangerous situation, and you didn't hesitate to help her. The Devereaux family would like to show their appreciation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Appreciation?" David nodded. "Yes, they'd like to offer you a reward for your generosity, something that could potentially change your life." Marcus frowned slightly. A reward? That wasn't why he'd helped Sarah. He had never expected anything in return for changing a tire. It was just the right thing to do. He didn't want to be compensated for doing something any decent person would do. "I'm not sure how I feel about that," Marcus said honestly, glancing between the two men. David smiled, as though he had expected this reaction. "I understand, Mr. Lewis, and the Devereaux family understands as well. This isn't about paying you for your kindness. It's about recognizing the goodness in people like you and wanting to give something back. They believe in supporting those who make the world a better place." Marcus was silent for a moment, processing their words. He wasn't a man who sought wealth or fame. He had lived a simple life, one that was built on hard work and the values his parents had taught him. But, at the same time, he couldn't ignore the opportunities that this reward could bring. Not just for him, but for his community. He thought about the people in his neighborhood who struggled to make ends meet, the children who didn't have access to the best education, and the families who needed more resources to thrive. After a long pause, Marcus finally spoke. "I'm willing to hear what they have to offer." David and Robert exchanged pleased looks, and Robert handed Marcus a card. "We'd like to invite you to the Devereaux estate tomorrow morning. Sarah and her family will be there to discuss the details with you in person." Marcus took the card, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had no idea what to expect, but something told him this was an opportunity he couldn't ignore. That night, Marcus barely slept. His mind was racing with thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. He wasn't the type to be easily overwhelmed, but the unexpected visit from the Devereaux family had shaken his sense of normalcy. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and he certainly wasn't accustomed to dealing with people of such wealth and influence. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about how one simple act of kindness had led to this chain of events. Could it be that something so small, changing a flat tire, was about to alter the course of his life? Morning came, and Marcus got ready with an unusual sense of nervousness. He dressed simply, in a clean button-up shirt and jeans, but his mind kept returning to what awaited him. The Devereaux estate was on the other side of town, in a part of the city he rarely visited. It was known for its sprawling mansions, pristine lawns, and high gates that separated the wealthy from the rest of the world. As Marcus drove through those streets, he couldn't help but feel a bit out of place. The grandeur of the homes around him stood in stark contrast to his modest upbringing, but he reminded himself that none of that mattered. His worth wasn't tied to material things. Still, the reality of where he was headed brought with it a sense of awe. He pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Devereaux estate, feeling small in comparison. A security guard approached his truck, and after checking the guest list, waved him in. The driveway seemed to stretch on forever, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and towering oak trees. At the end of the path stood the Devereaux mansion, a breathtaking structure of stone and glass that gleamed in the morning sun. Marcus parked and took a deep breath before stepping out of his truck. He wasn't entirely sure what he was walking into, but he was ready to face it head-on. As he approached the front door, it opened to reveal Sarah, smiling warmly at him. "Marcus, I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice filled with genuine happiness. "Thanks for inviting me," Marcus replied, shaking her hand. Despite the wealth surrounding her, Sarah seemed down to earth, just as she had the day before on the side of the road. "Come on in. My family is eager to meet you," she said, leading him into the house. The interior of the mansion was just as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, marble floors, and walls adorned with expensive artwork. Marcus had never seen anything like it in person, and though he felt a bit out of his element, he reminded himself to stay focused. In the sitting room, Sarah's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Devereaux, stood to greet him. They were a distinguished couple, clearly used to the finer things in life, but their demeanor was warm and welcoming. "Mr. Lewis, it's an honor to meet you," Mr. Devereaux said, extending his hand. "The honor's mine," Marcus replied, shaking his hand firmly. "We've heard so much about you," Mrs. Devereaux added, smiling kindly. "Sarah couldn't stop talking about how you helped her." "I was just in the right place at the right time," Marcus said humbly, still unsure why this was all happening. "Well, to us, it was much more than that," Mr. Devereaux said. "You helped our daughter in a moment of need, without any expectation of reward. That's rare these days, and it speaks volumes about your character." Marcus shifted slightly, feeling the weight of their words. He wasn't used to being praised like this, especially for something he considered to be just common decency. "We want to express our gratitude," Mr. Devereaux continued. "But more than that, we want to offer you an opportunity. Sarah told us about your background, how you work as a carpenter, and how much you care about your community. We believe in supporting people who make a difference, and we think you're one of those people." Marcus listened carefully, unsure where this was leading. "What exactly do you mean by opportunity?" Mr. Devereaux smiled. "We'd like to make a financial contribution to your work, whatever project you think could help your community the most. Whether it's starting a youth program, funding a new community center, or even helping families in need, we want to back you. Think of it as a grant, with no strings attached." Marcus was taken aback. This wasn't just a reward for changing a tire. This was a life-changing offer. The kind of financial support they were talking about could transform his community in ways he had only dreamed of. He had always wanted to do more for the people around him, but resources were limited, and there was only so much he could accomplish on his own. With the Devereaux family's backing, the possibilities were endless. "That's more than generous," Marcus said slowly, trying to process the magnitude of the offer. "But why me?" "Because people like you don't come along every day," Sarah said, stepping forward. "You didn't have to stop and help me. You didn't have to take time out of your day for a stranger. But you did. And that says a lot about who you are. We want to support that." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He had never been one to seek recognition or rewards, but this was different. This was an opportunity to make real, lasting change. Not just for himself, but for the people he cared about. "I'm not sure what to say," he admitted, feeling overwhelmed by the generosity in front of him. "You don't have to say anything right now," Mrs. Devereaux said kindly. "Take your time. Think about what you want to do with the funds. When you're ready, we'll be here to help you make it happen." Marcus nodded, still in a state of disbelief. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what else to say, but thank you." After a few more pleasantries, Marcus left the Devereaux estate, his mind racing with possibilities. The drive home felt surreal, as if he were living in some kind of dream. He had never imagined that something as simple as helping someone on the side of the road could lead to this. Over the next few days, Marcus thought long and hard about how to use the Devereaux family's offer. He spoke with his neighbors, his friends, and the people in his community to get a sense of what was needed most. Ideas ranged from building a new community center to creating job training programs for young people. There were so many possibilities, but Marcus wanted to make sure he made the right decision, something that would have a lasting impact on the people he cared about. After careful consideration, Marcus decided that the best way to use the funds was to create a community resource center. It would be a place where people could come to access job training, financial literacy workshops, and educational resources for children. It would also serve as a gathering place for community events and support programs for families in need. Marcus knew that this was something his neighborhood desperately needed, and with the Devereaux family's backing, he could finally make it a reality.